You are listening to the Fantasy IPA Podcast.
Can't wait. It's time to go eat, baby.
Your audio hangout for the latest intel, projections, and analytics.
Hey, we are playing to win. I'm in a league of my own. They ain't ready for me.
Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Let's do this.
And welcome to another episode of the Fantasy IPA Podcast. I am joined today by Jamie Black. You can follow him at FIPA_Black. That's FIPA_Black. And as always, you can follow the site at Fantasy_IPA. So we've got an exciting show today. We are going to be talking about a pre-draft startup mock simulation that we ran. I'll get a little bit more into the details and we'll frame up kind of how that exercise went. What I did was I took ADP for Dynasty startups, and for those of you who are kind of new to Dynasty, startup is talking about that initial draft where you're taking the first players in a Dynasty draft. Now, what I did is I took the ADPs from multiple different sites that were using MFL. I took that information and created my database, and we assigned picks to John and Jamie. Today we'll be going over Jamie's picks, who picked at 1.5. So we wanted to get a pick that was kind of earlier in the draft. So we'll talk about your approach, Jamie, and what you were thinking as you got that fifth pick. We're going to be focusing more on kind of where the players are and where they're falling in the draft, and then general approach as you're building a team without that trade aspect. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it, Jamie. You had the number 5 pick. So when you were assigned that number 5 pick, what were your thoughts? Did you come in with like a general strategy?
Yes, I did come in with the strategy. I ranked my players, and generally speaking, for any draft, I rank the top 50 players because, in those top rounds, you want to try and grab the best player available. You want to find dynamic players, and that goes with Dynasty too. Dynasty, you would prefer to find younger players who you can build around for several years, but going into the first round particularly, I really wanted a receiver. This is a PPR format, so receivers tend to fare better. And, of course, first 4 picks were my first 4 ranked players, and they were all receivers. And the only ones I was 100% sure that I was going to take over Gurley. Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, and Odell Beckham Jr., those guys are ridiculous, and they should be the top 4 picks in just about any draft, with maybe the exception of Hopkins. I think Allen Robinson, you can make an argument for him there, or maybe even Mike Evans. But for me, I had those first 4 receivers, and then I had Gurley ranked as my number 5, and I think it's important that you stick to your guns. You go in, and yes, I wanted a receiver, but Gurley was my 5th ranked player. Have to go with my 5th ranked player.
Yeah, so I think a pretty good point here is that while you definitely want a general strategy going into a draft, you have to be dynamic and you have to kind of play the board as it comes to you. So Jamie kind of mentioned those names. At 1, Odell Beckham went, Antonio Brown went 2nd, DeAndre Hopkins went 3rd, Julio Jones 4th, and that's when Jamie picked up Todd Gurley. You also mentioned some others like Mike Evans and Allen Robinson. So, my question here, Jamie, is that with the Dynasty community really shifting towards that wide receiver, highly focusing on the wide receivers, partly based on their longer shelf life and less injury risk, you decided to go with a running back in Todd Gurley. So how do you justify going with running back when most of the community is going wide receiver?
Well, with most running backs, I don't think you could justify it that early in a draft, in this sort of draft. But Gurley's different. Todd Gurley He's as close to we can get to Adrian Peterson over the last decade. And so I think I'm looking at a similar player to Adrian Peterson 7-8 years ago. And Peterson is definitely someone you can build a fantasy team around. And also, you mentioned that it's trending more toward receivers these days, and part of that reason is because we don't really have bell cow running backs anymore. So it's really hard to find a running back that's gonna score 15 or 20 touchdowns. 15 years ago that wasn't unusual. It's very unusual now. Gurley is one of those types of guys that can do that. He provides a lot of value right there, and Gurley and Le'Veon Bell. Those are the two types of guys that I can see putting up, old school running back numbers. So that's how I justify that pick right there.
Yeah, I'm not saying I would have taken Gurley there. I haven't been faced with that decision yet. I definitely think Evans and Robinson would be on the table for me. But I think it's a good point where not only, like if you were to grab an AP on his rookie year, or go back to LaDainian Tomlinson and get that stretch of production that gives you that type of advantage in a position that is as scarce as it is, I think it's definitely worth the risk there. So moving on, between years, next pick, we had kind of a slew of receivers sprinkled in with some aforementioned names like Le'Veon Bell, Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper, Gronk, Des Bryant, Evans, Watkins, Allen, Green. David Johnson went early in the second round, Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Cooks, Demaryius Thomas, and the team right before you in the second round took Devontae Parker. That brings us to your second pick at 2.8. Who'd you go with here, Jamie?
And here I went with Devonta Freeman, another running back. But once again, all those receivers you just listed, they were that second tier group of receivers. The 2A and the 2B, the 2A and the 2B group. And I would have taken pretty much every guy you listed over a second running back, but I think most people probably have Freeman ranked as a top 4 dynasty running back. I've seen him ranked top 2. I've seen him ranked 3. I don't know that I've seen him ranked any worse than 5th. I have him ranked 3rd and just barely 3rd, ahead of David Johnson. And so again, he was the best player on my board at the time. And early in the draft, again, those top 50 picks, you generally need to go with your best player. It's not a position-based choice. It's which player is more dynamic. Who's gonna give you more points, who's going to be more steady, and for a long time. He's young as well, and he's in a good offense conducive to running backs. That Shanahan offense has always produced good running backs. So Freeman's a guy that I could see finishing in the top 3 at running back for several years to come. I had to grab him. Yeah. I wanted to grab receiver. Everyone would, especially after you grab a running back in the first round. But like you said, that tons of running backs or receivers were off the board. So Freeman was the best available by far in my book. So went ahead and grabbed him.
Yeah, so once again, we talk about coming in with a plan, and ideally you could have grabbed that stud receiver that could anchor your receiving core for the next 7-8 years. But the value just wasn't there, and you grabbed Freeman. Now, I think what you're trying to get to there is you grab the value there, and maybe you move Freeman for a young receiver here in the near term, because now that you've got a scarce position, not cornered, but you've got resources there to move and play around with, you can start to try to form your roster that way. But I think aside from the fact that we've already highlighted the the importance of being dynamic and being able to shift off of a strategy, even though you came in with one plan, is the fact that just doing these mocks kind of gives you a feel for what's going on. And as we go through this and you see some of the running backs that are still available in the third round, maybe when you actually are doing your draft, you may forego a Gurley to grab one of those receivers, knowing that there's a high possibility you might grab a running back in the second round. But, the purpose of this exercise was just to kind of get out there, see where things are falling. And that's why I think I'd encourage any one of you that are going into, your startups to take a look at ADP, take a look at, run a couple mock drafts if it's available for you. Just get a feel for how things fall, and with certain strategies, how your team ends up playing out. We'll recap the entire team at the end of the draft, but really a good exercise to go through these mocks. I'm gonna shift a little bit away from the kind of the strategy around what you did with these certain picks, and I do want to talk about Devonta Freeman, David Johnson, and what I'm calling kind of that cluster tier right underneath Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell. And we did not include rookies in this draft, but I have seen, Ezekiel Elliott squarely planted within this tier, some before David Johnson, some between David and Freeman. So let me just ask you real quickly as we head into the draft, Jamie, if this did include rookies, would you consider Ezekiel Elliott here, or would you have still taken Devonta Freeman?
I definitely would have considered Ezekiel Elliott. It would have been a lot easier after the actual NFL draft to see what team he ends up on. I do think he is, he's, other than Gurley, he's the next best back that's coming into this league. And by next best, I'm including, the past several years. Adrian Peterson, there hasn't been this great back, and Gurley's supposed to be that guy. Well, I think Elliott could be too. And if Elliott lands on a team like the Cowboys, with a team such as that type of offensive line, wow. Yeah. He's an early grab. But to your point, if we were including rookies and he hadn't been drafted yet, I don't think I would have grabbed him, but I definitely would have considered him.
All right, moving into round 3. So after Freeman went Landry, Cobb, Hilton, Benjamin, Luck, White, Kevin White. We had Lamar Miller go right before you took your third round pick in Cam Newton. So once again, I'm kind of watching this draft unfold, and I'm thinking, okay, running back, quarterback. Jamie is definitely zigging where the community zags. So talk to me about your third round pick, Cam Newton.
One thing about dynasty drafts, and you and I are all too familiar, is those top tier quarterbacks are hard to find, or they're hard to hang on to, and it's because the 12, or we play in 14 and 16 team leagues as well, but those guys, they're not going to give up an Andrew Luck or a Cam Newton or an Aaron Rodgers. They're going to hold on to them for years, and there's value there, a lot of value. Now, Russell Wilson slipped into the 5th round. That provides a lot of value, probably more value than drafting a Cam Newton in the 3rd. But after Andrew Luck went with the first pick in the 3rd round, I knew Cam Newton and Rodgers were coming. I was set at running back. I had 2 good running backs. Miller went right before Newton. Rawls was there. I was considering it, but the receivers that were there, I just couldn't justify drafting those guys over Cam Newton. Jordan Matthews. I like him. I like him a lot. Jordy Nelson, Dante Moncrief, even John Brown. I even considered Brandon Marshall at that pick as well, even though he's a little bit older. But and Michael Floyd. But at the end of the day, early in the draft, you stick to your guns, you grab your dynamic guys, and Cam Newton is certainly that. And he's also, he doesn't deviate much. He puts up numbers consistently year in and year out, and his legs, he rushes for 600 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's always going to have those numbers.
So there's definitely a component to grabbing that stud quarterback and being able to plug him in without thinking about it week after week and not having to worry about shuffling or streaming. I'm not saying that's the strategy I would have taken. I might have waited. I think that one thing you'll see within this ADP is that people that are drafting right now are a lot of your experts, and they tend to wait on, experts and diehards who tend to wait till later on quarterback. So, there is a risk that if you wait too long, you may be stuck with somebody that you're not comfortable playing week in and week out. In this case, grabbing Cam and locking him up for the foreseeable future and really not having to worry about quarterback theoretically, I think is justifiable. All right, moving on. Just to recap really quickly. So through 3 rounds, Jamie's got Todd Gurley, Devonta Freeman, Cam Newton. And in the 4th round, after some assorted players like Michael Floyd, Edelman, Macklin, Lacey, Kelsey, Eifert, Aaron Rodgers went. And by the way, you can see the entire draft at our site. We have the mock draft posted, so I won't go through each name between picks, but please jump on there. Might even be a good idea to have that up if you're listening online to kind of see how this flowed. But in the 4th round, Jamie, you went with Brandon Marshall.
Well, Brandon Marshall he produces year in and year out. He finished 3rd last year at receiver in PPR formats. I believe he holds the NFL record for 100 reception seasons. He has 6, and there are a few guys that have 5. He's one of those guys that takes care of himself. He's in good shape. Yeah, he's 32 years old, I believe, but I still think he has 2 or 3 solid years left in him. And he's a number 1 receiver. In a redraft, he's a top 5 or 10 receiver, and for me to be able to get him this late, it gives me time to be able to go back and find a younger number 1 receiver, to take his spot one day. And the good thing about dynasty leagues is you build your team, you draft rookies, and you can trade. So again, I wanted a number 1 receiver. He was the best available for me this year, and he is a number 1 receiver right now.
Yeah, I think I'd like to touch on something that's, I think it's a bit understated right now in today's NFL that, you talk about grabbing these stud receivers and having them anchor your team for the next 7-8 years. But in today's NFL, it seems like you can grab those types of guys year after year. So it's not like, going this direction, you won't have opportunities to plug those in. Now, 2014 was definitely an anomaly where we saw many different receivers emerge, but we also saw a good slew of receivers emerge last year. This year, the thought is that we may not see as much talent or as many producers come out, but I don't know in today's NFL. I think I'm going to wait and see how that happens. And with 2017 around the corner with a deep group of skilled player positions, I think there might be possibilities to kind of fill in those gaps where, in your roster where, you want those young stud receivers that can emerge as number 1s.
I think so too. And adding to what you were saying about the receivers, we seem to see more and more every year that are productive, but it's kind of the opposite with running backs because most backfields are shared these days. So I think you don't get me wrong. I would always take Odell Beckham Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, guys like that. But if you can get a Gurley or a Le'Veon Bell or even an Elliott, he might be like that when he comes out. You have an advantage because most teams aren't going to find a running back that are going to get 20 plus touches every year and score double-digit touchdowns for them, and those receivers are much easier to find.
Yeah. So the three receivers that went between now and your next pick were John Brown, Tyler Lockett, and Allen Hurns. Did you consider any of those three guys?
All three of them. In fact, they were all three. They were all three next up for me. So I really like. I like all of them. Don't get me wrong. They all have something to bring, but I like Allen Hurns a lot. He might be the least favorite by most people, and he was drafted last out of those three for us. But I like him. I like what he brings to the game. And I do like Tyler Lockett as well. We saw what Baldwin did when Jimmy Graham went down last year, and Lockett, being a rookie, he didn't do quite as well, but I think Lockett will emerge as the 1A or 1B to Baldwin's 1A, and I believe Baldwin is he in a contract year, or did he?
Yeah, Baldwin's in a contract year. That's where I was going. Is mark me down as a Lockett. Lockett proponent. I think that's probably who I would have grabbed. Explosive, big time flashes last year. Baldwin, there's a good chance he remains with the team. But either way, I still think by the end of the year it's going to be Tyler Lockett's kind of the 1A, as you put it, in the receiving game over there in Seattle.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. All right, so. You finally went a little bit younger at receiver. You grabbed up at 5'5", Golden Tate. So first, tell me what you were thinking. Who else were you considering at this point? And then we'll go from there.
Last year with Calvin Johnson, Tate caught 90 passes. And in 2014, there was a stretch when Calvin went down. I believe it was week 5. He went down for about 4 games or so. And in those 4 games, when Tate was the number 1 receiver, he was the number 1 receiver over that time span. And in fact, he averaged in a PPR 24 points per game. And the only receiver at the end of the year that averaged more than that was Odell Beckham Jr. in his big year. So I don't think Tate's going to maintain those types of numbers with Calvin gone. Plus, they brought in Marvin Jones, but with Calvin, out of the way, and Tate getting more options, I do see him as a productive receiver.
Yeah, Golden Tate definitely exceeded my expectations as he came over from Detroit. I don't know what was holding him back in Seattle, but when he's had the opportunities, he's kind of stepped up, and although he hasn't been consistently elite, he's had some pretty big games where he's popped. And I think when they did move to Jim Bob Cooter, I just wanted to say that name, so I had to work it in, but
awesome name.
They that offense saw a pretty steady uptick across all the position player or the skill position players. I think that continues. I think while Stafford may never be that elite quarterback that is going to carry a team on his back, I think that he's a little bit underrated now, as he showed vast improvement when Jim Bob Cooter took over. So I like the Golden Tate pick. I still want to see how Marvin Jones affects him and how Eric Ebron kind of, progressing and presumably getting more involved in the offense affects him. But I think Golden Tate is one of those guys that, he's a good underneath receiver, and I think that the emergence of those types of guys can only help his production.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, moving on, we saw kind of some running backs, some receivers go. Once again, take a look at kind of who went after Golden Tate on the site where we posted the mock. But at 6.8, Jamie, you grabbed Michael Crabtree.
He was productive and he catches passes. He's still fairly young. He's going to be a possession guy on that offense, and he caught double-digit touchdowns. Well, I think it was 9 touchdowns, but and he finished as a wide receiver too. He actually finished higher than Amari Cooper. Cooper hit a rookie wall, so that's not going to continue to happen. Cooper's the guy there, but I see Marshall as being a strong number 2 receiver in that offense, especially in PPR formats. He's going to catch passes. He's going to score touchdowns. He's got a big body, and I think David Carr is a good quarterback.
Yeah, kind of props here to Matt Harmon, who called him out in his reception last year and talked about how Michael Crabtree could thrive in kind of that timing-based offense as opposed to the Colin Kaepernick see it then throw it. So Crabtree definitely fit in well there. He way exceeded my expectations, I'm not going to lie. Now he does turn 29 next year, but in receiver years, I could see a good 2, 3, maybe 4 good years, and that offense is just moving, is just ascending. So Michael Crabtree there, aside from age and aside from injury concerns, could be productive for you as your number 3 receiver. So Todd Gurley, Devonta Freeman, Cam Newton, Brandon Marshall, Golden Tate, and Michael Crabtree at the end of round 6. Moving into round 7, another slew of running backs went with a couple young quarterbacks in there like Winston and Blake Bortles. But at 7.5, you grabbed Coby Fleener. What were your thoughts here, Jamie?
I think that in New Orleans, the tight end is going to be productive. Ben Watson was productive last year at 35 years old. It was by far his most productive season. And if you go back and look at the last 4 or 5 years, I believe New Orleans has finished first in balls thrown to their tight end every time except for once. And it was 3rd last year. So Fleener is a big guy, athletic. He's a good receiving tight end. And honestly, in that offense, especially with Colston gone now, I think he's a strong tight end. I think he's going to be a tight end 1. I really do feel that.
Yeah, I agree with you there with Fleener. At this point, when ADPs were pulled, I don't know if he had seen the uptick as of yet. So, when you reached out and grabbed him, it was a little early compared to the ADP, but I think this might be where he ends up falling in. You talked about New Orleans' propensity to target that tight end and how they've produced number 1 tight ends year after year. I am generally more a talent trump situation, but in this case, the situation is just so good. And, Fleener, well, he's got to be able to catch passes because he can't block. So I think he's that kind of tight end that could jump up definitely in production. And if they went out and got him, so they've committed to him. Now they did re-sign Josh Hill, but I don't think that's going to affect Fleener. I think he's going to be that number 1 option at tight end. So I like where you grabbed him here. The tight ends that went before him are Ertz, Olsen, Eifert, Kelsey, Gronkowski, and Reed. I think you might even make a case if you're going young, taking him over Olsen, despite Olsen's uber consistency over the past couple of years. He's getting up there in age, but I could probably see Fleener even going to get ahead of Ertz. Okay, so Jamie, you're 7 rounds in. You've got your 2 running backs. You've got your quarterback, 3 receivers, and a tight end, and it just so happens that you've kind of filled out, a starting lineup there. Was that part of your plan? Were you looking to fill all your positions, or are you still going best player available at this point?
No, I wasn't looking to fill out my starting lineup first. I don't necessarily think that's the best way to do it. I do know a lot of owners do that. I still think, for the first at least 5 rounds, you're grabbing the best player available. But I went back in after I solidified my running backs. I feel like with Gurley and Freeman at running back, I'm strong, and so I don't really need to address it. So I was able to go back in and grab my receivers and tight end and, somewhat fill out my starters at that point. The plan wasn't there. It worked out well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Jamie. I don't think that, in my opinion, I don't think it's sound strategy to try to build out your starting roster. I think you still stick with the value, and especially as it pertains to availability of certain positions like quarterback and tight end. I think you can wait and grab some of those more elusive skill positions and kind of fill in those single start positions later in the draft if needs be. But I do see how it kind of fell into place for you there with Fleener kind of rounding out your 7th pick. Especially if you're playing in a league with flex positions. But moving on into the 8th round, we saw kind of a mix of now older players jumping in, some running backs, receivers. At 8.8, you went ahead and grabbed Sammy Coates. So go ahead and talk about that pick.
Well, with Coates, he's more of a long-term pick for me. And there is a certain point in the draft where, and I didn't intend on filling out my starters, but there is a certain point in the draft where once you've solidified your team, your starters, your 1, 2s, and 3s, and even flex, you look for guys with upside. And Martavius Bryant, his suspension, who knows? It could be something where he doesn't get reinstated quickly. Hopefully it's not. I don't think he's a Josh Gordon. But just in case, I grabbed Sammy Coates. I think he has more long-term upside than Wheaton. If this was a redraft, I would have grabbed Wheaton first because he'll probably be the number 2 this year for most of the year. But Coates is the guy they like better, and he's the bigger guy. If Martavius Bryant is gone, done, then I really do like Coates in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Coates, profile-wise, kind of matches up to Martavis Bryant. I don't think he has yet that tracking ability and that alien-like skill set to contort his body in the air and grab that ball, but that remains to be seen. So I like I've been grabbing Sammy Coates up. He right now he's kind of hit or miss in my mind, seeing if he can take that next step and develop as that deep threat for Ben Roethlisberger. But if he does, and if Martavis Bryant does keep messing up and Sammy Coates assumes that role long term, there's nobody better in the league than Roethlisberger to get you on those deep balls as he's scrambling and buying time in the backfield. So interesting. You talked about Martavis Bryant because I thought it was really interesting that your next pick at 9.5, you actually grabbed Martavis Bryant. Now, at this point, his ADP had started to drop, and with his upcoming suspension. But I think important note here is that where you start seeing rookies go right in this range, and you assume rookies may not be starting that first year, it's almost like you are taking a rookie, and if Martavis Bryant comes back full strength next year, this might be a steal right here. But what was your thinking on grabbing Martavis Bryant?
Exactly what you said. If he does come back, he's phenomenal. The talent is there. He's a beast, and we've seen it. We've seen flashes. He was ridiculous in the playoffs last year, in the regular season as well. And he's a star. He's a future star in this league if he can stay out of trouble. So yeah, my thinking there, it was twofold, really. One was what I just said. I can put him on my bench this year, kind of treat him like a rookie. Hopefully he comes back next year and he's producing like a number one receiver. But two, it's also sort of a handcuff to Sammy Coates. If Bryant doesn't come back, I believe Coates will be the guy to develop into to his position rather than Wheaton. So I'm looking at it as one of those two guys are going to be very productive for me in the future.
Yeah, and that was actually my follow-up question here is, if you hadn't taken Sammy Coates in the 8th, or let's just say Sammy Coates wasn't on your roster, would you still have considered Bryant here?
Probably not that early. I probably would have waited. I had considered Bryant coming into the draft. He was one of my target players, but I don't know that I would have done it this early. Another reason that made me take him this early was somebody grabbed Tevin Coleman in the 9th, and I wanted to secure Devontae Freeman, to secure that Atlanta backfield, grabbing Tevin Coleman there. So even if I had Coates and Coleman had been available, I probably would have gone Coleman, thinking that Bryant would have slipped to me in the 10th possibly. But without Coates, I think I maybe would have given it another round for Bryant.
Yeah, and I think you are like me, Jamie, where we're always looking to buy low, and with Martavis Bryant's suspension coming out, it might be a prime opportunity to get him. I've seen him go in a wide range of positions in the draft. I've seen him traded for a wide range of draft picks. So he's definitely polarizing, but if you've got the roster space, and probably a good time to kind of hit on 2 points. One is, once again, as you're going on your board and you're looking at your team makeup, and the very rare case where it makes sense to handcuff a receiver, it may actually play itself out. So be dynamic in your board. And like Jamie said, he kind of pushed Bryant up a little bit based on the fact that he has Sammy Coates. I think second point I'd want to hit on here is, know your league rules. If you've got, there are different taxi squad rules. There's different IR type rules. If your league allows you to put suspended players on the IR, or if your team allows you to taxi squad people other than rookies, which, for me personally, I don't necessarily agree with being able to kind of stash suspended players that don't affect your roster. But if you do, take advantage of that. And, those roster spaces are valuable, especially in those deep leagues. But if it's advantageous, maybe bump up those suspended players a little bit higher on your board if you're allowed to stash them on a tax or an IR slot.
And he's definitely one of those guys that's worth it. I mean, his rookie year in 10 games, he caught 8 touchdown passes, 550 yards. He was on pace for 13 touchdown receptions, and that's incredibly hard for an NFL receiver to catch 13 touchdowns, especially for a rookie. So this guy's the real deal if he can get back on the field.
Yeah. So after 9 rounds, Jamie, you've got 5 receivers, a tight end, a quarterback, 2 running backs. In round 10, you went ahead and grabbed your 3rd running back in Ryan Matthews. So talk about that pick.
Well, Ryan Matthews, he was, one of my better running backs I had left. I thought I needed to grab him right there. I thought he might have gone earlier than that. And also, in Philadelphia this year, I believe he's going to be the man unless they draft a running back, and that is possible. But the coach, Doug Peterson, is from the school of Andy Reid, and their running backs, their offense runs through the running backs, and Ryan Matthews should have a lot of opportunity. And even last year, with Chip Kelly there, it kind of messed things up. You know, he didn't know who he wanted to put in or out at running back, but Ryan Matthews, he averaged over 1 point per touch, which is extremely rare. It doesn't happen. In the top 10 last year, I think maybe only one other guy did that. The year before, the same thing. Maybe one other guy did that. So, he's got the talent, if he can stay healthy, to produce as a running back 2. And at the very least, a flex or a high running back 3. And grabbing him that late, I think it just comes down to value.
Yeah, I like the pick. I think Matthews, you said that he could produce like a running back 2, but, I harken back to, like a Thomas Jones type comp where they took him in the first round. Thomas Jones took a little while to develop, but what I saw out of Matthews last year was someone who was running hard, who was, finding creases, who was moving piles. So, I like the pick and to get a perceived workhorse back this late, and I do think he has kind of the body type, if, like you said, if he could stay healthy, but he's got the build and he's got the skill set and the talent to really assume that role. So maybe if he gets the opportunity, which he didn't get last year with Murray there.
Yeah, I agree.
So moving on to round 11, you grabbed your second tight end here in Dwayne Allen, Coby Fleener's ex-teammate. So go ahead and talk about Dwayne Allen here.
Well, Dwayne Allen, first off, he's playing with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And Dwayne Allen's rookie year, he looked like he looked like he was going to be the next, not Gronk, but he looked like he was going to be the next number 1 type tight end. He was going to be strong. He put up good numbers his rookie year. He has Andrew Luck throwing him the ball, and he just kind of fell off. He got injured is what happened. I believe it was in week 1 in his sophomore year where he got hurt catching a 20-yard touchdown pass in week 1. And he hasn't quite been the same yet. And part of that is injuries. And part of that is, having to share snaps with Fleener. But right now it looks like he's the tight end in Indy. He should get the tight end targets there. And there's a lot of upside there. He's still young, and he has Andrew Luck throwing him the ball. By all accounts, he's talented. So I thought it was a pretty good place to grab him and solidify me at my tight end position.
Yeah, Dwayne Allen, I'm a big fan. He, smooth. Like, I was surprised at how good he looked on the same field as Coby Fleener, because when they took Fleener high, everyone expected him to kind of seize that primary tight end role. But Dwayne Allen, he forced himself into getting those targets and always been a better red zone target. He's a great blocker, so he shouldn't be coming off the field. I think he's a good all-around tight end. If he can kind of improve in the volume piece and retain some of the touchdown success that he's had in past years, he could be, I could actually see him up there as possibly your flex, and maybe even somebody that you could trade away if Fleener turns out like we think he will in New Orleans. But I definitely like Dwayne Allen here. Just to kind of frame it up with some of the other tight ends going in this range. We had Barnage go, Jimmy Graham, Max Williams, Martellus Bennett. I think I would probably say I like him better than all of those, with the one exception being Clyde Walford. Clyde Walford did go about a round earlier, but I do like Clyde Walford in that Oakland offense. But Dwayne Allen, I think, pretty solid pick right here.
Yeah, and in 2014, when Andrew Luck was healthy, he wasn't last year, the tight ends caught 16 touchdown passes in Indy. So there's no reason to think that he can't grab double-digit touchdowns there, as the tight end in Indianapolis this year.
Yeah. Okay, moving into round 12, you picked up Shane Vereen. What were you thinking here, Jamie?
Well, again, a couple of guys that I was waiting on kind of went off the board there. So, for one, I did like Ty Montgomery. I was hoping maybe he would come back to me. I liked the upside there for a receiver. I thought maybe I could grab him. Also, Alfred Morris. I think Alfred Morris is not getting his due attention right now in Dallas. McFadden is still the number one running back. Maybe they're going to draft a running back. But behind that offensive line and seeing what Morris has done in Washington a couple of times, I think Alfred Morris could have a good year in Dallas. And so I was really hoping he would fall. But those two guys went. So Vereen in a PPR, I think he's very solid. He's my running back 4. He's caught over 50 passes in the last 3 years. He's in that offensive friendly system in New York where he's going to continue to catch balls, and Rashad Jennings is really the only running back ahead of him, and he's on the wrong side of 30. Jennings is a 31-year-old running back, I believe. So I like the upside there. Also, in a PPR league, he's going to put up numbers every week because he's going to catch passes.
Yeah, it remains to be seen if they grab another back in the draft. But Vereen, I think, if they do, I still think Vereen holds his value. I think if they do grab another young back, the person that might hurt would be Rashad Jennings. But Vereen definitely shown the ability to step up when Jennings was hurt last year. Definitely has that floor as it pertains to PPR and catching passes out of the backfield, and has a lot of, he's got OBJ on the outside, just taking the defense's focus. So, little dump-off passes could be pretty profitable for this type of back. Moving into round 13, Jamie, you went with Brandon LaFell.
Yeah, LaFell wasn't one of my better picks, but I needed something at receiver. I needed some depth, and he's a veteran. He's not bad. He's in a good situation. He's the number 2 receiver in Cincinnati. A good offense. So I think he's going to have some good games. I don't know that he's going to be consistent because they're going to throw the ball to AJ Green. They're going to throw the ball to Eifert, and they have 2 good running backs there that are going to be involved every week. But Brandon LaFell, he's a guy that, he can be a bye week start for you, maybe even a flex for you depending on who they're playing. He's a decent depth guy, not a bad guy to have on your bench as a receiver for depth coming off.
Yeah, LaFell, he spiked when he went over to New England. I think the situation over there is conducive, especially if, barring injury, or don't want to wish injury, but, if AJ Green goes down, Cincinnati has shown that second wide receiver has stepped up and produced in the number 1 role. So, I'm not a big fan of LaFell, and I don't think you're a huge fan. But I think as we start getting into these later rounds, it's more around kind of taking your choice of flyers at this stage, and I think LaFell probably falls into that category. But, you talked about LaFell slotting into that number 2 receiver position in Cincinnati. Funny enough, in the 14th round, you actually grabbed Mohamed Sanu, and I think he's the presumed number 2 in Atlanta. He played that number 2 role in Cincinnati a couple times, and even the number 1 role in Cincinnati due to injury. But I actually like this pick, so talk to me about Mohamed Sanu.
Well, Sanu's still a young guy. He's in a great situation in Atlanta. I don't particularly think he is a great receiver, or he has, he has what it takes to be a number one receiver in the NFL. But he does have tools, and he does have what it takes to get it done. I think that in Atlanta, everyone's going to focus. This is a Shanahan offense. Everyone's going to focus on the X receiver. Julio Jones. Everyone's going to focus on Julio Jones and the running backs there. And, Sanu's going to have his games. We saw some other guys do it. Harry Douglas did it a couple of years ago. He had some big games when Jones and White were hurt, and Roddy White wasn't playing well last year. Jacob Tamme had some big games. I do think Sanu's in a good position to put up consistent numbers, not big numbers, but consistent numbers. Good enough to stash away on your bench, and use him if someone gets hurt, or if you have a bye week, things like that.
Yeah. As you mentioned, he does have he's versatile. He's never really shown like true consistency as a number one, but in that number two role in Atlanta, where you've seen names like Leonard Hankerson put up some pretty big numbers, I really like the idea of him over there with Julio drawing coverage to the other side. So at this point in the draft, and you'll see that we've kind of got into that piece, that part of the draft where it is about taking flyers, and it's kind of like pick your flavor at this point. So that in mind, I think that as opposed to going through the next four picks, Jamie, I'll call out your next four picks. So we only did 18 rounds here. One of the reasons why we did that is it kind of gets you in that base floor of like a 20-man league where you assume kickers and defenses are going to take up two slots. And then even beyond that, it's more kind of around they're kind of a really big tier of flyers and people that you prefer, that you think could emerge. But with the last four picks, you took Joe Flacco in the 15th, Mike Wallace in the 16th, Kristen Michael in the 17th, and Stephen Ridley in the 18th. So of those four picks, did you want to add any color or talk about any of those four?
Well, for one, I think Mike Wallace is probably a little bit underrated right now. He hasn't been very productive since he left Pittsburgh, but he still has speed. He can stretch the field, and he played with Tannehill, who for whatever reason can't throw a deep ball, and then he played in Minnesota where they didn't get him very involved deep. Joe Flacco can throw. He can definitely throw Wallace the ball. Flacco has the arm for it, and I think Wallace is going to be a big part of what they do there in Baltimore. Wallace is someone who I do think he can do something now, and maybe does something enough to where I could trade him for someone younger. And in Dynasty, there's a lot of trading involved, and sometimes that's my thought process when I'm picking these guys. Is if a team is weak at receiver but they're competitive this year, maybe trade for someone like Jeff Janis who probably won't do much this year, but maybe in a year or two could. Christian Michael, if Thomas Rawls, if he's not 100% by week one, Michael's only had 2 games in his career where he's touched the ball more than 10 times, and both times I think he averaged 5.5 yards a carry in one of those games and 6 in the other, and it was 2 of his last 3 games from last season. So maybe it's coming together for him, because as far as an athlete, he's super athletic. His measurables are off the chart. So I grabbed a couple of guys there that completely upside guys, and then
getting Flacco in the 15th is just a testament to how you can get that late quarterback talent. Flacco's going into his second year under Trestman, which the first year was a little underwhelming, but he really didn't have much to throw to, and with Mike Wallace in house, with Kamar Aiken actually showing some stuff last year, Steve Smith coming back. The intriguing rookie that didn't play last year, Rashad Perriman. Flacco, I could see it get an uptick this year, and in the 15th round, I don't think you can go wrong there. Kristen Michael, the dynasty darling that people just can't quit. Mike Wallace still has that speed, so once again, I think at this point it's kind of take your flyer and see how it plays out. You may be churning them off the end of your bench eventually, but taking those upside players at the end of the draft is definitely a good strategy there. So in conclusion, Jamie, we've got Cam Newton and Joe Flacco at quarterback, Todd Gurley, Devonta Freeman, Ryan Matthews, and Shane Vereen at running back, as well as Kristen Michael and Steven Ridley that we just talked about. Your wide receiver core: Brandon Marshall, Golden Tate, Michael Crabtree, Sammy Coates, Martavis Bryant, Brandon LaFell, Mohamed Sanu, Mike Wallace, and then at tight end you've got Kobe Fleener and Dwayne Allen. So, what are some of the things after you've seen your whole roster come together? In retrospect, any general learnings you'd like to share?
I think you can probably wait a little bit longer for quarterbacks. At least, in some of these drafts, it's hard to say, but I do like strong quarterbacks, but there's fourth and fifth and sixth guys are putting up pretty good numbers too. And, maybe get that extra receiver. If it was up to me, if I could change something, I would want a top end receiver. I would have rather drafted maybe in second or third spot, or 10th or 11th spot, where I could have grabbed that solid foundation running back and that solid foundation receiver right away.
Yeah. So I think some of the main takeaways we talked about are, come in with a plan, but be dynamic. If your plan doesn't necessarily play out, don't reach for position, but stick with the value. And I think in general that's a good principle to go by. As the draft unfolds, assess your team, see what makes sense for your team, and if it means reaching for, like a Martavis Bryant, since you do have Sammy Coates, it's okay to reach, a couple rounds if you feel like that's going to lock you down and it makes sense for your team and the makeup. Once you get to those later rounds, make sure you're grabbing those upside flyers. And then lastly, I think that we touched on, really don't try to fill out your starting lineup. Grab the value and fill out the lineups, and especially in those one start positions later in the draft if need be. But always want to go with the value and do your due diligence on the trade market to make sure that you're doing what you can to shore up that starting lineup, because players' value is static, whereas the positions on a team, although you can fill them out, if you're not getting max value from those picks in the long run, it's going to hurt you. So that wraps up our review of the mock simulation with Jamie Black, who picked at 1-5. In our next episode, we'll be visiting with John, who picked at 1-9. Once again, you can see the entire mock posted on our site. This was pre-draft, so there's going to be a lot of moving pieces moving forward, but we wanted to get it out there and kind of really focus in on the strategy, and particularly with this podcast, drafting at 1.5. I want to thank you, Jamie, for joining us today. Once again, you can follow Jamie on Twitter at FIPA_Black, FIPA_Black. Jamie, any closing remarks or?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add is the importance of tier-based drafting, especially once you get later into drafts. And I'm going to post an article based on this mock draft and go into detail a little bit about tiers and how they can help you, especially in the middle of drafts when you're drafting in a 5 or 6 position and you're looking for someone to come back to you and whatnot. As always, we really, really would appreciate your feedback.
Thank you, Jamie. And as mentioned, we'll be talking to John on our next podcast, who's drafting from the 1-9 position. Then we are squarely in post-draft mode, where we'll be starting to focus on rookie landing spots. We've been mentioning the Dynasty 400 that we're holding off on releasing until after the draft so that we can adjust accordingly. So look for that in the near future. Otherwise, thank you guys for listening. Please go to the site, give us feedback. Please go to iTunes and subscribe. It would really help us out. I am Art Richardson. Once again, follow us at Fantasy _IPA. And that's going to do it for the latest edition of the Fantasy IPA Podcast. Thanks.
Adios.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy IPA Podcast. Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Hail to the king, baby.
To the house, baby.
Please subscribe and review at iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast provider.
Call trust. That's called trust.
See you next time, and until then, make sure you get you some IPA.
Come get some.
Get some. Get some. Get some.
We just want to say thank you for all the love.
And we're out.